Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
The best late-night conservative talk show in America, Sackheads Radio. And listen, there are no people better on the air to give you the best in conservative talk than Sackhead Sean and Sackhead Clint. And we're working on the immigration papers for a certain other guy who happens to work there too. But for those who are tuning in around the world to the best in late-night conservative talk, Sackheads Radio. The best late-night conservative talk show in America. In America.
And in this web was a large, I'm pretty sure it was the biggest spider I've ever seen.
Hey, boys, look what I got here.
Hey, where are the white women at?
We ain't.
Oh, yeah. It's going to be one of those nights. Going to be one of those nights here on the Sackheads Radio Show. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me. That's right, you heard it. Just me, Sackhead Sean. Because, I send Clint out for a simple 1 week assignment. Just 1 week. That's all I ask. Because, hey, listen. Just go out, get some information, come on back. Nothing too hard. But, like a giant child that he is, he doesn't show up. No, I'm just kidding. He's on assignment yet again. Down in beautiful. I don't think he's throwing rocks at hookers yet. I'm just saying that I don't think that's happening. But he's definitely in a place where rocks could get thrown at hookers. That's all I'm saying. But it wasn't the same rock hooker place last week. And you have to calm a rock and hooker, blah, 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 blah. But he will be joining me on the phone here shortly. In the chat room, they start already. Yes, he's on assignment in Tijuana. No, because they wouldn't let him back over the border. I'm sure he's marked on some level. I am sure on some level he would not be allowed back if he went out. And really, there are days that we just don't want him back. Let's be honest. I am the personality on the show. He's just, he's just there. So he'll be on the line here shortly, hopefully. He better be. Because if he doesn't, well, frankly, I'm going to have to call the second best newsman of the business, maybe. So anywho, I know normally we do a bunch of time, a general jackassery. First of all, for our listeners, if you want to jump in the chat room, go to shrmedia.com. Click live chat on the right-hand side. You can jump in. Already a couple people starting to get in there. If you haven't listened, Dan the Man Butcher, El Duce, as I like to call him, or El Duce, I forget which one I call him, but started back this week. And you can listen to his first two shows. He had the amazing Liz Loris on Monday night. And you can listen to his first two shows on Spreaker. Definitely worth sitting down and listening to. Great to have him back. And, of course, Jersey Joe, who has just been lighting it up nonstop for us 5 days a week, 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 on the East Coast with the Reaver Common Sense. And then on Wednesdays, he does this Reaver After Dark show at 5 on the East Coast, 5 on the West Coast, rather, and 8 o'clock on the East Coast. So special thanks to Joe. I want to get down. There's like some sort of magical sound playing in the studio, and I have no idea what that is. I want to get down and talk about this pinhead. And my buddy Jer Bob, good friend of the show, brought this to my attention. I didn't see it. And it started a few days ago, and the truth came out just today, as a matter of fact, it looks like. There's a professor at the University of North Texas by the name of Dorothy Bland. Dorothy is a journalism professor at the University of North Texas, and she also occasionally writes for the Dallas Morning News. She penned a story claiming racism against some police officers in the town that she was walking in. And she titled it, Dorothy Bland, I was caught, quote, walking while black, was the title of the thing. And she went on to say how she was walking in the neighborhood, blah, 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 blah. She does it every single morning, exercise. She's walking in the lane of traffic, and her story is essentially that these two white police officers show up and stop her because she's black. And that's essentially it, and that it's just racism, and really that was it. Well, reality comes out, and dash camera in this situation was a humongous help. And here's why. The police chief said that there'd be an investigation and reviewed it. Okay, you have this young lady, and I'll use that term loosely, both young and lady, who's alleging that while she's just exercising, these two police officers who have nothing better to do with their time, nothing whatsoever, decide to go into the suburban neighborhood and stop her. Because why? Well, because obviously they're racists. This is pretty much her account of the story. They had nothing better to do that morning but hunt down innocent black women and demonize them. So, the police chief gets this complaint, and rightfully so. She investigates it. I have no problem with the investigation, and nor should anyone. Right? I don't want there to be any incident like this because, let's face it, the possibility that there was wrongdoing could happen. It didn't in this case, as we'll find out soon, but it could happen, right? So anyhow, she goes on, she says she's walking on a Saturday morning walk through a golf course in the community of Corinth, Texas. Quote, I often walk about 3 miles near daybreak as part of my daily exercise. However, on October 24th, I delayed my walk until later in the morning as I waited for the rain to stop. I was dressed in my hooded, quote-unquote, Boston sweatshirt, black leggings, white socks, plus black and white Nike running shoes. Like most African Americans, I am familiar with the phrase driving while black. But was I really being stopped for walking on the street in my own neighborhood? If you watch the video, thanks, Dan, I'll get right on that story. You just IM'd me. You find out that this wasn't the case. And the police chief in Corinth, she came right out and said, hey, my officers did exactly what they were supposed to do. This woman was walking in a lane of traffic, a Class C misdemeanor in the state of Texas, walking in the lane of traffic. They stopped her. The basis of their conversation was, hey, we don't want you to get hurt. I'm not giving you exacts, I'm just paraphrasing. You're walking with your back to traffic, you have your headphones in. Yeah, it's lighter than it normally is, and visibility is a little bit better. However, that doesn't mean that every operator pays attention. You should be more careful. They checked out her name, all this other stuff, because they had legal right to do so. She was committing a Class C misdemeanor. They have a right to stop and investigate that. They determined that she was free to leave. They issued her a warning. They didn't even cite her for it. They made sure her license or personal information came back clear and sent her on her way. And they were polite the entire time. It was good police work in the sense of they saw a crime, they stopped, they investigated it, they felt it could be resolved by simple communication, that they didn't have to go the right of a citation, and they felt that the message got through to her and sent her on her way. They were polite, they were never rude. So this pinhead sends out this, she has a mouthpiece, right? She has this loudspeaker that she can use, and she knows she can. So she chooses to take to the media, and this is what's problem. I know that there are many false claims of racism. I also know that there are actual claims of racism. It happens. As much as it's disgusting and horrific, it does happen. But you have this woman who, in my opinion, used this situation to try to get her 5 minutes of fame. A Rachel Dolezal, if you will. I have a mouthpiece, and I'm going to use it for my own personal use and gain. I'm going to become famous. I'm going to be on the news. I'm going to be all over the place. I'm going to finally get that break where I'm no longer teaching about journalism. I can go out and be that journalism, and then MSLSD or CNN or one of those horrible news networks are going to pick me up because now they'll know who I am. I'm important. Only the videotape tells another story, doesn't it? She's not important. She's a liar. She's an absolute liar. And what does she do? She takes away from people who have real and legitimate complaints. Agador in the chat room just said, 2015, it's rare. I absolutely agree with you. It's so much more rare now than it ever has been. Much of the racism, quote-unquote racism, that gets thrown out there is false. You have the pimps like Al Sharpton and the likes of Jesse Jackson, etc., who make money off of it. I know it's rare. But it does still happen. And when it happens by somebody wearing a badge, they need to be held accountable. If they're using their position of authority to push their racist, negative feelings, then yeah, absolutely, it needs to be investigated and dealt with. But what does this woman actually accomplish? She just took a lot of power away from people who may truly be victimized. But we get this from the left a lot, right? Any chance they get to put their face, it doesn't matter if they're this Dorothy Bland or whoever it is, Rachel Dolezal, whatever. They want to get their face in front of a camera so bad. They want to push an agenda so bad. Rules for Radicals 101. Exploit everything you can possibly exploit to make yourself a victim. And that's what she does. And she does it, and not only at the risk of the victims, but also at the risk of these two police officers. Had there not been a dash cam, had there not be overwhelming evidence that they did nothing wrong, overwhelming, they would have been convicted in the eyes of the public like that. It would have happened so fast. Their names would have been dragged through the mud. CNN would have put their houses on TV. Even though that they didn't hurt her or put their hands on her, whatever. She has no marks. It doesn't matter. The left would have jumped on this like they jump on so many other things that are false and just not true. But she got caught. And now, the few networks that were starting to push this story and try to get it out there, they want it to go away because it doesn't meet the narrative. And even though it was as simple as walking down the street and she got stopped, in the great scheme of reality, it is not a big deal. It wasn't a big deal that night to those cops. She was probably just insulted because how dare these peons stop a professor? Where have we seen that with law enforcement professors before? Oh, right, Cambridge, Massachusetts, the first year Obama was president. And then all of a sudden the president, oh, wait, maybe she was hoping for a beer summit with the president and get her 5 minutes of fame there as well. And then that professor, that Harvard professor, Gates, he ended up hosting a whole bunch of like shows on PBS and a bunch of other things about history. Oh, maybe she wanted her television show. My next question is, does the university she works for, and I think it's University of North Texas if I'm not mistaken, are they going to absolutely get rid of her, fire her, lose her, bye-bye, see you later, you're a liar? How can you teach journalism when you are on video, on record, lying about such an incident that could have caused a firestorm in this country? Let's say that, stop for a second, just hit the brakes, and say that these police officers acted inappropriately. Let's move her over 10 feet and she's on the sidewalk. And then all of a sudden, you have the helicopters, CNN, Al Sharpton's marching around with people down there. The craziness explodes, right? And what if these cops did say something wrong or disparaging? It doesn't take much to change the reality to match exactly what they want. Everybody would have went insane. But fortunately, like 99.9% of the cops out there, these cops were professionals. They knew they weren't doing anything wrong, and you could tell when they're talking to her. They didn't have any reason to hide what they were doing or try to stop what they were doing or anything like that. They knew. Hey, this person's walking in the street. They could possibly get hurt. This woman should have been writing a letter saying, hey, you know what? These two nice cops stopped me and potentially saved my life because I could have got hit by a car. I do this all the time. Normally I do it in the dark in the morning. And I don't think about it. I just go out and walk because I'm trying to get my exercise. So I want to thank these two cops for potentially saving my life. For maybe that one driver who just woke up and he's reaching down to get a sip of his coffee and hits me or whatever. That's what should have been written in the newspaper. That's what should have been on the headlines. Hey, these cops were great. Headline, not all cops suck. Headline, believe it or not, contrary to popular belief, cops are great people. But no. This little troll wanted her that's right, troll. Wanted her 5 minutes of fame. And she was willing to sacrifice those guys' job, the well-being of people, to get it. And doesn't that sum up the left? Doesn't that sum up progressivism? Doesn't that sum up everything we talk about on a regular basis when we talk about the left? They will do whatever it takes to get the power and attention that they want. It doesn't matter who they step on to get there. It doesn't matter whose lives they ruin. They need to have a cause. They need to have that name put up on a banner and walked around. Because without it, they're just a normal person. Well, we're all special. Isn't that what the left teaches us on a regular basis? We're all super special and we deserve everything all the time. That's the left. Don't work for anything but expect it all. Well, she's getting it all. I hope she's out of a job. And you know what? If I was down in Texas and I think this university takes state funds, I would be calling your state congressman right now saying, hey, why does this woman have a job? She is a liar, a proven liar, teaching journalism. And I know Dan's saying they don't teach journalism anymore. We can have that argument another day. But that's her job right now, is to teach. All right, how about this for everyone out there? Teach quote-unquote journalism. And then you take the journalistic aspect away and realize that she is in front of a classroom teaching young people. And what is she teaching them? We talked a couple weeks ago about the left in colleges teaching and how they'll teach an agenda versus facts and reality. What else has she taught them that were lies or exaggerations? Is she teaching journalistic integrity? I highly doubt it. It's just frustrating. Jer Bob showed me this story and my head butt exploded. Absolutely exploded. It never fails to amaze me. Excuse me a second. I dried myself out on my tirade. So there's a lot of other stories that are out there today I wanted to talk about. And if Clint ever calls in, I might answer it. I might not. I haven't decided yet. But I want to talk about this 9-year-old boy in Chicago. This is just horrific. So Chicago, which by the way has more shootings this year than all of 2014, already up to, and we still have a couple months to go. Earlier this week, 9-year-old Tasheen Tyshawn Lee, was playing in an alley or hanging out in an alley. They're still trying to figure it all out. But he was shot several times, I think a total of 3, at close range and killed. A 9-year-old child. When we talk about inner city gang violence, when we talk about who's really to blame for the loss of life amongst our black Americans, it's inner city violence. And we could talk about the races responsible, whatever. That's a whole other thing because they haven't really stipulated that, and I don't want to go to too much conjecture. About 42 minutes ago, they're reporting that a person of interest has turned themselves into police for questioning. And I'm just getting that from ABC 7 in Chicago. But you have a 9-year-old boy, and I don't care. I don't care what this kid was doing. I've already read, well, maybe he was one of those kids that runs drugs for people, blah, 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 blah. I don't care. He's a 9-year-old boy. If he was doing something he shouldn't, forget it. We can talk about that another day. He is a child amongst children. I mean, he's not even, he could barely ride a bike. And some thug, and I don't care what color the thug is, executed this little boy at close range. And then they're initially saying, oh, we're not sure if it's crossfire, blah, 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 blah. If 4 people were shot and he was one of the people shot, then you could argue that there was crossfire. When you have a 9-year-old boy shot 3 times up close, at close range, and killed in an alley in Chicago, it needs to raise the hair on the back of your neck. And if you live in these cities, and if you're one of those what are the t-shirts I see all the time? Don't snitch or something like that. This is the situation that you're creating. When you don't snitch, or you allow drug dealers, or you don't police your communities, you don't call the police and report crimes, and when there is a crime, you don't say you saw anything. Well, I didn't see nothing. Really? Because the video camera showed that you and 4 friends were standing right there facing that direction. I didn't see nothing. I ain't no snitch. 9-year-old boy, shot and killed. Somebody better have damn seen something. And if this person of interest isn't the shooter, then they need to find him. But these communities need to start owning their problems. You can't rely on the police to do their jobs when nobody sees anything and nobody wants to get involved and it's not my problem. It is your problem because it could be your kid next. And if it's black on black crime, brown on black crime, I don't care. Anyone who has children, and I don't care where you live, where you're from, or where you're going, if you have a child, or nieces and nephews, or friends with kids about this age, take a look at them and imagine, just for a second, this happened to them. You'd want the entire world, everybody who could have been in the area and heard, saw, smelled, to speak up as much as they can. And Tyshawn, his family deserves that. And I don't care, I've said it before with situations like this, I don't care what his family members have done, if they're good people, bad people, whatever. It's a 9-year-old child whose flame was extinguished at the hand of a thug. And as far as I'm concerned, when they catch that thug, if it isn't the person who turned themselves in, they need to get the chair, or gassed, or hung. I don't care. This is more heinous than anything else out there. You want to talk about what's wrong with America? Everyone wants to point to the racist police. Why don't we start looking at the real problems? I think back to my good friend, the exceptional one, Ken McClinton, and his daughter being murdered. And where was the outrage there? He had a core group of friends. Absolutely. And they rallied. Absolutely. And he's still fighting to this day to make a change. Absolutely. And there are many people who are standing with him. And there are many other people like that in the country who are trying to get the momentum going, to make a change in their community. But I hate to say it, Chicago can only blame Chicago for these types of problems. Democrats, you have a hand in this. I'm not saying you're responsible for this young man's death, but for the situation that the city of Chicago's in, your hands are all over it. It's one of the most violent cities in the world. I hate to say it. Most of the guns used are being possessed by people who shouldn't use them, who probably shouldn't be out of jail. Right? We saw that with the New York City police officer who was killed a couple weeks ago. The judges that released him, the shooter, they had remorse because they didn't look at the totality of the facts. Our criminal justice system, it's not the cops that are the problem in this. It's the liberal laws and this ideal that people can be rehabilitated, blah, 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 blah. Oh, we can make them better. Put them back out and be productive members of society. Hey, that's all well and good. You don't go to jail for that. You go to jail to pay your debt to society. That is what jail is and prison is for. To pay your debt to society. If you want to rehabilitate when you get out, great. Go for it. When we do early release and early parole, and our prisons are overcrowded, and I heard a couple pinhead liberals talking at lunch the other day. They were in town for a convention that has to do with prisons and all this other stuff, and I really started to listen close when one of them was saying, I met with the president last week, Obama, and these guys legitimately were higher ups in the democratic ways. You could tell by the way they were talking, how they would dress, and how they approach things. But one of the things that they said is, all these other states that are using segregation and admin seg, or ad seg as they like to call it, and putting people in rooms by themselves for days on end for bad behavior, they're crazy. They've lost their way. They're not rehabilitating those people. No, it's not their job. Liberals created rehabilitation in prisons to create jobs for other liberals. I can tell you right now, you go to San Quentin Prison in the Bay Area, California, one of the nastiest prisons in the country. Death row is there. And you look at on the weekends, all these uber-rich people who live in the Bay Area, a majority of them liberals, because I have friends who work in that prison and they've told me, who come in and paint with the prisoners and play tennis with the prisoners. These are guys who are murderers, rapists, and robbers. They get 3 square meals a day. They can have education for free if they want. Hell, you can get a sex change in California prisons now. All these things that there's a reason people reoffend and go back to prison, because their life is actually better in prison, barring the occasional shanking and possible shower rape. But I've talked to some people who've gone back. They've told me that. Hey, listen, I get 3 really decent meals. I can learn a trade. I can hang out in the day room. As long as I don't do anything really bad, I don't get solitary confinement, which some prisons in California don't even do anymore. If I claim to be a special unit or need a special unit, I'm protected, protective custody, all these other things. And on top of it all, they have people who come in on the weekends, play ping pong with them, tennis, teach them how to paint, coping classes, how to cope with their stress and anger, blah, 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 blah. I've heard stories of females who've started relationships with them, all these other things with the prisoners. It's mind-boggling. When have we taken the teeth away from our criminal justice system, and why? And it's spreading, and more and more this is happening, and this is why people in Chicago think they can shoot a 9-year-old boy, Tyshawn Lee, and not think twice about it. This is the type of situation you create when you allow lawlessness. Yes, there's procedure in place, but there's no punishment. There's faux punishment, but there's no real punishment. There's no rules that are enforced. these judges and trial lawyers and everything, they've destroyed the punishment system in our country. People aren't afraid to go to prison. Hell, when I was growing up, the thought of being talked to by a cop scared the hell out of me, because if my parents ever found out, they'd beat the snot out of me. If I got yelled at, not for saying hi, but you know what I mean. Now, you hear kids, 16-year-old kids say, I ain't afraid to go to prison. Why the hell not? Oh, right. Because we're starting to fail our children. Under the guise of rehabilitation and alternative sentencing and blah, 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 blah. It's all bull, and it's only going to get worse. People, you need to start taking back your cities and your streets. The cops patrol it, but you live there. Most of the cops get to go home at night. You have to stay there 24/7. And I don't care if you pay for your house, if the government pays for your house, whatever. We can have that talk again later. But we have to start by getting these scumbag criminals put in their place. And their place is by a 4x8 cell with a really uncomfortable bed and a toilet that works every third day. Bread and water. Bread and water. As you can tell, I'm up against a break. When we come back, I want to talk about the Russian plane that went down and some of the new information that's coming out, some of the speculation and conjecture. There's a whole lot more right here on the Sackheads Radio Show, live on the SHR Media Network.
In a world controlled by corrupt politicians,
You got a business. That you didn't build that.
a team of ordinary men emerge from the ashes to give voice to the voiceless and hope to the hopeless. Sackhead Sean.
Dude, I'm not saying cow for the stupid promo.
Sackhead Clint.
All good friends of ours usually show up drunk.
Also starring Sacco as the producer.
I'm a little bit drunk, 'cause I'm drinking.
They are the Sackheads Radio Show. Every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Pacific on shrmedia.com.
This is Tammy Jackson, inviting you to join me on the Tammy Jackson Show every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Pacific on the 405radio.com. Put down that remote and tune into the show that covers politics, guns and the Second Amendment, religious liberties, sanctity of life, the military, and more. I host newsworthy guests and work hard to be a conservative radio show that's not like all the others. So save Tuesday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific from me, Tammy Jackson, on the 405media.com.
Who listens to the Andrea Kaye Show? Let's find out as we eavesdrop on listener Roger Johnson in Encinitas.
You know, if our policy is going to be bring any child who comes across the border, we have to take them in.
Okay, so apparently Roger fell asleep in the middle of my brilliant political tirade, and now he plans to sue me because I put him on the air, sleeping. Obviously, he's a liberal.
Snoring, not an option while listening to the Andrea Kaye Show, Tuesday mornings at 11 on Financial News and Talk.
You know I'm right. Y'all know I'm right.
Hello, I'm Matt, a student at Hillsdale College. Here's Hillsdale President Larry Arnn on the continuing relevance of the Constitution.
Many argue today that the Constitution is outdated because it addresses problems peculiar to the 18th century. Some parts of the Constitution do read rather quaintly. Consider the injunction against titles of nobility in Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution. But is that so outdated? The purpose of the injunction is to prevent the government granting special privileges to some for partisan reasons. This strikes at the heart of the rule of law. The crony capitalism so common today is a place where the government bestows favors and tax dollars on some businesses to give them a leg up over others. This is exactly the kind of thing the Constitution was meant to prohibit. The Constitution is not so outdated after all.
This Constitution Minute was brought to you by Hillsdale College. To join the national conversation on the Constitution, go to constitutionminute.com.
And welcome back to the Sackheads Radio Show, live on the SHR Media Network. I love the inbox messages I get from some of my quote-unquote friends who were just trying to help me out when my when my partner doesn't show up. Oh, man. So, a couple days ago, Sunday now, a Russian airliner fell out of the sky. Russian Metrojet took off in Egypt about 20 minutes later. The plane fell from the sky. Scores of people, including a lot of children, died in the crash. This is one of those things, and I hate to say I was right, but I immediately kind of suspected terrorism. And here's why. I saw the initial crash report, and then somebody said, hey, you know what, it was at 31,000 feet. And planes don't historically just fall out of the sky, right? Dr. Randy Arrington, who is also on CNN now talking about airline issues or flight issues, who's a good friend of mine and has been on Edge of Liberty with me during my daytime show when I had it, we talked about that with the German Wings plane. And he said, once you get up to cruising altitude, planes are pretty reliable. They don't just fall from the sky. It doesn't just happen. So I was immediately suspect, given the location and origin of the flight, all the activity that's going on. Plane crashes down in the Sinai Peninsula in a completely desolate area. The front part of the fuselage crashes and burns, but it almost crashes and burns in one piece. I know there are pieces strewn all over the place, but that specific main part of the fuselage, you can tell by the pictures, just crashed and burned together. And then the tail separated before the crash and burn, as you can tell, because it's only dented, it's not burned. And I said, I know nothing. I know nothing about airplanes and disasters and how they react, etc. But I do know that usually when something like this happens, that tail doesn't just fall off. And I know information came out that it was involved in a tail strike years earlier, but even that, it normally doesn't just happen unless something causes decompression. If it happened next to the engine and the plane got cut up there because part of the engine shot apart and went through the fuselage and caused a depressurization suddenly, okay, but based on just what I saw and what little I know, even I had to say, let's hit the brakes. Something ain't right. Well, now, the Brits were the first to come out with it today, saying that, let me back that up. American intelligence said that there was a large heat signature seen on satellite where the plane was at its last known location. And that was strange. The black boxes that were recovered and listened to by Egyptian authorities said there was some strange noises. Now, they're saying that it looks like a bomb was inside the plane, possibly in the storage area under the plane, that blew the plane in half. The front part of the plane crashed to the ground. I'm sure the pilots did what they could. And the tail section of the plane fell, obviously, and did not burn. Everyone died on board, as I said. The Brits came out pretty quickly and said, hey, we think this is a bomb. You have to remember, one ISIS affiliate immediately claimed responsibility 2 separate times. The first day it happened, said, hey, yeah, we did that, and everyone kind of laughed them off. And then today they re-released another statement. Essentially said, yeah, we did it, and it's up to the West to figure out how we did it to try to stop it. And they will. But if it was a bomb, as U.S. intelligence is starting to leak out, the Brits are starting to leak out. ISIS may have made the worst possible mistake that they could have made. Listen, there's problems going on in Syria, and they're fighting with ISIS, the Russians are, and bombing them. Which is all the more reason why I kind of suspected this right off the bat, right? ISIS was already angry that Russia's bombing their people. And you now have a Russian airliner and a Vladimir Putin and ISIS kind of meeting in a very, very dark alley. Because here's the thing. Unlike us, well, when Reagan was in office, we dealt with it appropriately. But unlike the current status and the current administration that's in this country, Russia's going to do something. And I would not be shocked if in a few days you start seeing Russia bombing ISIS all over the world. I'm not kidding. They've literally poked the bear bombers. And they may have crossed the line. And we saw with Chechnya and other things, the Russians don't mess around. And more so now, with Putin on this march that he's on to try to prove his strength and to try to prove and get the Soviet states back together, even if it's not the original, we know that Putin's on this warpath, literally. And finally, we may get what many of us in this country want. We may get ISIS beaten to a pulp, but it's not going to be us who does it. Not going to be us who does it at all. It's going to be the Russians. And they're going to go crazy. I'm not kidding. I think you're going to see Russia in Egypt. I think you're going to see Russia bombing more in Syria. Russians are going to start bombing in Iraq. They're going to bomb wherever they think Turkey is, and they're going to bomb them back to where they want to live, 500,000, 600,000 years ago, whatever time frame you want to use. Because here's the difference. And as much as I hate Vladimir Putin, I've said this before, he will not take a shot across his bow, or the Russian people's bow, and not come back and strike twofold. He doesn't care what the world thinks about them. He doesn't care what the UN thinks about them. He doesn't care about being a good neighbor. He doesn't care whatever. He cares about power. That's all he cares about is power and respect. He's a gangster. I'll be the first to admit it. Putin's a gangster. He's an old KGB guy. KGB, rather. You know what I mean? He is an absolute gangster. And he is going to do what gangsters do. He is going to hit back twice as hard. Think St. Valentine's Day massacre. Only Putin's in charge. And they're going to use warplanes and ships and probably troops. He's going to go absolutely insane. And the whole world's going to go, no, you can't do that. You can't just do that to Egypt, blah, 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 blah. And he's not going to stop, and they're not going to do anything to stop him. Why? Because finally somebody's going to take care of this problem. I said troops, and I mean, I think Putin will drop troops in whatever country he has to eradicate. I really think that this is going to be a much bigger incident than anybody realizes right now. Mark my words. It's not just Syria. It's going to be everywhere. And he's not going to stop. For two reasons. He needs to show any enemy of his country, and this is his opinion, that they will not be messed with. He has to show the people in his country who may at some point rise up against him or vote him out of office or try to vote him out of office or coup or whatever, that he doesn't mess around. And I'll actually throw in a third reason. The supporters of his in that country will love him even more for it. And I'll tell you right now, his approval ratings starting to go through the roof with his approach to ISIS. I mean, without a doubt, the Russians, they don't like ISIS. And as much as we do the PC thing in this country and talk about, it's just an element of Islam, blah, 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 blah. No. The Russians they They don't want ISIS to even kind of exist. And they're willing to take action. And I think Putin's going to be, he's going to be a man on a mission. Literally, the old joke with Putin is it looks like every time he walks away from something, it's going to explode. That joke, that joke may be reality. Every time Putin walks or looks at a country, there may be explosions there. Because he's not afraid. He doesn't care. He doesn't have that. He's not a coward. I may not like the man, and I may not agree with everything he says and how he does things, and I know he's Putin. I'm not giving him any more respect. But he's going to protect his people because it protects his power and his authority. He's going to protect his allies because it protects his power and his authority. And if you're Putin and you're trying to spread through the Middle East, you're already in Syria. You're already welcome, quote unquote, in Syria. Said this before. What took the Russians so long to get into Syria is they were working out the deal to know how much control over the country Putin was have. I'm sure Assad wanted Putin to have 98% and Putin wanted 99%. Assad says, as long as I can live in my palace and be protected, you can come and do whatever you want. And as long as I'm here, you can do whatever you want. How soon do you think Egypt gets that phone call? Hey, I know you guys have this really bad ISIS problem. We're not afraid to help out. But going to need a couple bases and a little bit of political control in your country. I can keep these terrorists away. Just be my friend. Putin is turning himself into the good guy to a lot of these countries that are unstable. When we talk about America being the world police and how some people don't like it, some people like it, blah, 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 blah. But when we created a vacuum by kind of starting to pull things home, by the way, we saw that Obama last week extended our stay in Afghanistan. The Army admitted that the U.S. is actually in a combat role in Iraq, and we're starting to put troops on the ground in Syria. That's neither here nor there. Once we created this vacuum of starting to go away too soon, too quick in unstable areas, and people now know that America is afraid to stand up to tough battles. Not the people, the government, Obama and the other shills up there. And now all of a sudden, here comes Putin. Hey, we can stabilize your region for you. We can help out. You have these bad ISIS guys? Hey, they bombed our plane, but whose plane's next? You guys are helping us with the investigation. They're already a thorn in your side. Let us land some planes. Let us use some ports. Give us some oil. And then all of a sudden, you now have the Russians in Egypt. I don't think, somebody said he's talking to an Israeli back channel. I don't think Netanyahu would talk to Putin. I just don't think so. I think he's too smart. He knows what Putin's play is. They don't need Russia per se. I know we're not helping them out, but Israel is becoming more self-reliant as the days go on. They have the ability and technology. They don't need Russia. So I don't know if it's being answered if he is talking through the back channels. But all of a sudden, Putin's going to be all over the Middle East. I mean, all over that Middle East. You're going to have countries that are speaking Russian as a second language. When I said 4 years ago on this show that Putin's trying to put the band back together, they just maybe have different players. I wasn't kidding. And now we're starting to see more and more that that's a possibility and that's a reality. And it's not going to end with Egypt. And it's not going to end with the Middle East. Everywhere that there's Islamic extremists, Putin's going to use as an opportunity to get boots, planes, and equipment on the ground and then stay there. and then stay there. And they're starting to creep out again and creep out more. We already know about China, the China connection. That's a big deal. We already know about the Iranian connection. That's a big deal. Russia, there's some places in South America. Do you start to feel like our troops are being surrounded by Russians? Because I kind of do. And right now it's our troops, but it's not long before it's our country. I guarantee you with this new uber-liberal, crazy Canadian Prime Minister, thanks, Cal Fritzy, eh? How soon do you think before Putin starts making friends with Canada? When I say I don't trust the man and he's crazy, I'm being 100% serious. You're talking about a guy who sent over warplanes on the 4th of July to quote-unquote wish us a happy 4th. That wasn't it. It was to poke us a little bit. Same thing he's been doing right along with the sub-patrols and the sub in the Gulf. All of that is a reality. This is Putin using Cold War tactics. He's playing checkers, and our moron in the White House is playing chess. Let me reverse that. Putin's playing chess. You know what it is I just looked up and saw a compliment from Dan Butcher in the chat room. And, by the way, shrmedia.com live chat. And I actually got it. Then I got nervous, right? The pressure was on me. Second best newsman in the business, paying me a compliment. I have to keep up my game. And I say Putin's playing checkers and Obama's playing chess. No, reverse that. Putin's playing chess and Obama's playing checkers. And we're in trouble. I really believe that. We're in trouble. And I talked about the 50 troops on the ground. We're now advising in Syria. And I'm sure we were already there when the Army Master Sergeant, who was a Ranger, died in the Kurdish assault last week on ISIS that rescued hostages. It kind of told us we were already on the ground. He was in an advisal role, as they say. But we were on the ground. But now they're saying, we're going to put 50 advisors in Syria. How soon before Putin tests a response from this administration? Because we know Russia is bombing the rebels that we as a nation, are supporting right now. We know we're going to have 50 troops embedded with them. We know that Russian House Intel guys all over the place now because they're working with Syria. How soon until a bomb drops and kills, a Russian bomb drops and kills an American soldier and a member of the military who's advising? And then what happens? What will we do as a nation? We already know Russians, I saw a report today that Russians are bombing just ad nauseum in Syria. They're just throwing bombs around. They're killing civilians. They don't care. That's who Putin is. He doesn't care. They're bombing areas that are sympathetic to the Syrian rebels. So the Syrians that want Assad to stay in power, they don't care. But what happens when the American gets killed in that bombing? What's our response? Because Russians going to say, hey, we told you we were there. We were invited. You weren't. You're working with these rebels. You're on the opposite team. And Dave Agador in the chat room absolutely nailed it. Obama will send a whiny letter via the UN, and he'll probably apologize for some way for putting our troop in the way of his bomb or something like that if I know how Obama works. And I absolutely agree. It won't be the response it should be. And Putin's going to just put that little notch right in there. Click. And Putin's going to do a lot. Folks, it looks more and more like we're going to have a conservative in the White House. Putin knows that. He knows that this ability to push around isn't going to end. You're going to see the Russians move this year more than we've seen them move since after World War II. I guarantee it. Because he knows he can only push this president around and that the next guy or gal will probably not stand for it. And even if it's Hillary, I hate to say it, Hillary won't allow Putin to push her around because it's Hillary, and I've talked about it before. I think she only cares about what Hillary cares about. And if he's making her look stupid, I think she'll push back way more than this guy would. As a matter of fact, the liberals don't want that because she is uncontrollable. That's the only reason why they're not as big of a Hillary fan as you think. That's why Bernie Sanders is polling so well right now, because he's controllable, she's not. So outside of Sanders, just about anybody who gets into that White House is not going to stand for this crap with Russia. And Hillary has a chip on her shoulder over the reset button. And she's going to prove that she's not going to be pushed around by Russia and that she's going to fix it. Hell, Sanders loves Russia. We talked about it last week, right? He's the guy who won it like, what's his name there? Lindsay said during the debate. Sanders went on a vacation to the Soviet Union, never came back. Sanders isn't going to stand up to him. So barring Sanders getting in the White House, just about anybody who gets in there is going to stand up to this guy. More than this president has. And he knows that. And you are going to see a Putin move and spread as much as he can. He's going to be man-spreading, folks. He's going to be man-spreading all over the globe. Get that image out of your head, huh? How's that for you? Is that burning a little bit? A little brain bleach for you? Yeah. Yeah, I do what I can. Because Putin's power hungry. And he knows he has a weak president in the White House right now. Beyond weak. I don't even know what a lesser word for weak is. Or a better word for weak, depending on how you want to look at it. We have a coward in the White House. I don't even want to say coward because he's intentionally not standing up. A coward would be afraid to do something. He's not afraid. He's making his choices, and he knows what he's doing. It's not what we want him to do, but he knows what he's doing. Respond to a wonderful offer from Agador in the chat room. No thanks. I appreciate you offering that up, but not this time. But the question is can this president hold him off enough for the next president to get in? Listen, we've already talked about it. It doesn't matter who the next president is. They are going to be dealt a humongous mess from the moment they swear in. And there's going to be a lot of things to get done. Doesn't matter who it is. But you're going to see this president, I think, just be backed down all the way. And he's going to allow it to happen. And nobody's going to stand up. And you're going to have Congress do what Congress does. Blah, 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 blah. You're going to have all the typical talking heads come to the microphone and talk about, once again, how something needs to be done. But kind of unlike the Russians did in World War II, after they just kind of took over all those states, the Soviet states. This time's different because Putin's being invited in, and he will be invited in. He's cutting the deal to take the power. And there are countries that are going to want him there. Dan Butcher in the chat room, in the bizarre world of Obama, everything is the opposite of reality. Up is down, left is right, and failure is success. If the liberal leftists were capable of independent thought, they would realize that throwing several billion more out of the system that is economically flawed only postpones the inevitable and makes a greater IOU in the end. It's obvious that Obama and his ilk are incapable of making an honest assessment of their failures. I couldn't agree more. And there's more brilliant things being said by Kel Fritzy and Dave in the chat room, too. If you're not in the chat room, folks, you're missing out. There's also a lot of really funny things that are being said, too. But I'll leave it at that. But you mark my words, 9 o'clock Pacific time on the 4th of November, 2015, you are going to see a Soviet Union. Let me check that. A Russian Federation spread all throughout this world within a year. They annex a few places they have to, and then invite themselves into other places and never leave. And then they will have the ability to reach out and touch us wherever we are. Everyone's talking about global warming, but it seems to me that we're really, really close to another Cold War. That could possibly change everything. We're up against a break. Hold on, wait. If I don't do it, Sokka will text me and yell at me. Wait, here it comes. We're up against a break. When we come back, I don't know, I have a couple things I want to talk about. Hopefully Clint will find a phone number, and if not, maybe I'll sing for the last hour of the show. All that and more here on the Sackheads Radio Show, live on the SHR Media Network.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
The best late-night conservative talk show in America, Sackheads Radio. And listen, there are no people better on the air to give you the best in conservative talk than Sackhead Sean and Sackhead Clint. And we're working on the immigration papers for a certain other guy who happens to work here, too. For those who are tuning in around the world to the best in late-night conservative talk, Sackheads Radio. The best late-night conservative talk show in America. In America. In America.
And in this web was a large, I'm pretty sure it was the biggest spider I've ever seen.
Times are dark. The people are misled by corrupt politicians, lied to by establishment media, and deceived by the false messages of Islam. A nation looking for direction needs a guide. It needs a man with a cane. I'm Dave Milner. Join me on Spreaker, SHR Media, Pundit Press Radio, and YouTube through the SHR Media page for a different kind of commentary on the unpleasant blind guy. Because the truth is not always pleasant.
In a world controlled by corrupt politicians,
You got a business. That you didn't build that.
a team of ordinary men emerge from the ashes to give voice to the voiceless and hope to the hopeless. Sackhead Sean.
Dude, I'm not saying cough for the stupid promo.
Sackhead Clint.
All good friends of ours usually show up drunk.
Also starring Sokka as the producer.
I'm a little bit drunk, cause I'm drinking.
They are the Sackheads Radio Show. Every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Pacific on shrmedia.com.
This is Tammy Jackson, inviting you to join me on the Tammy Jackson Show every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Pacific on the 405radio.com. Put down that remote and tune into the show that covers politics, guns and the Second Amendment, religious liberties, sanctity of life, the military, and more. I host newsworthy guests and work hard to be a conservative radio show that's not like all the others. So save Tuesday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific from me, Tammy Jackson, on the 405media.com.
Who listens to the Andrea Kaye Show? Let's find out as we eavesdrop on listener Roger Johnson in Encinitas.
You know, if our policy is going to be bring any child who comes across the border, we have to take them in.
Okay, so apparently Roger fell asleep in the middle of my brilliant political tirade, and now he plans to sue me because I put him on the air, sleeping. Obviously, he's a liberal.
Snoring, not an option while listening to the Andrea Kaye Show, Tuesday mornings at 11 on Financial News and Talk.
You know I'm right. Y'all know I'm right.
Hello, I'm Matt, a student at Hillsdale College. Here's Hillsdale President Larry Arnn on the continuing relevance of the Constitution.
Many argue today that the Constitution is outdated because it addresses problems peculiar to the 18th century. Some parts of the Constitution do read rather quaintly. Consider the injunction against titles of nobility in Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution. But is that so outdated? The purpose of the injunction is to prevent the government granting special privileges to some for partisan reasons. This strikes at the heart of the rule of law. The crony capitalism so common today is a place where the government bestows favors and tax dollars on some businesses to give them a leg up over others. This is exactly the kind of thing the Constitution was meant to prohibit. The Constitution is not so outdated after all.
This Constitution Minute was brought to you by Hillsdale College. To join the national conversation on the Constitution, go to constitutionminute.com.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Sackheads Radio Show live on the SHR Media Network. Still trying to find Clint, which at this point I can't even begin to. Maybe they won't, or maybe they won't let him back in the country. Maybe his cell phone signal isn't working where he is, whatever third world part of the state he's in. I don't know. Trying to get a hold of him. It's not like him just to bow out. I'm not going to send out a search party just yet, but yeah, no Clint. So you're stuck with me, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah. I want to talk about another mass shooting incident that occurred this morning. Wait. Nope. Sorry, I read that wrong. Stabbing. It was a mass stabbing incident? That's right. UC Merced early this morning about 8 a.m. Individual walked into the University of California, Merced, and began stabbing people. Gun-free zone, so he followed that rule, fortunately. Nobody died, luckily. 2 victims were transported by helicopter to a local hospital. There's a great update on it on punditpress.com. The suspect was eventually shot and killed by police, but not until 5 people were stabbed. I think they updated and said it was 4 stabbed. But I'm getting conflicting back and forth. Classes were canceled for the day, etc., etc. And it's funny how, if this was a shooting incident, and even if this was a shooting incident and nobody perished, mainstream media, he's going to bitch and complain about mainstream. It's after 9, I can say bitch. Bitch and complain about mainstream media again. You're right, I am. Mainstream media, again, kind of started to jump on it early in the afternoon. I got all the alerts, and then they were like, oh, no, he was just using a knife, and nobody really died, so we can't peddle the death and destruction. There's no platform to discuss why guns should be eliminated, etc., etc. Yeah, let's let this go. We're going to blurb it. It'll still be there occasionally, but we're not going to run to this like we normally do. Folks, we talked about this in the past. Clint, my partner Clint goes crazy on this, and I agree. The first mass killing in this country on this soil that is documented was done with an edged weapon attack. We talk about other edged weapon attacks that happen throughout the country. Then we talk about the left who comes out and wants to talk about end gun violence, but not all violence. They just don't do it, right? And this is another example of a gun-free zone that was attacked because the suspect, who I'm sure if we find his writings later on, or if he had an agenda or whatever, a manifesto, if you will. I hate when they call it that, but I don't know why. It's just me. But I think we will find that he planned on dying anyways. He just wanted to be able to inflict as much damage as he could prior to that happening. Well, he's not going to walk into a gun shop and do it. He's not going to walk into a shooting range. He's not going to go to a public place where Merced's in kind of a rural part of the state. They issue CCWs down there, pretty common. He's not going to walk anywhere where he knows he's going to be met with a threat. He's going to walk into a gun-free zone, in this case a university, and commit his heinous act. And he did, and got the end that he wanted to. We talk all the time. After Oregon, the shooting at the school in Oregon, the president was on TV an hour later. Oh, we got to do something about this gun violence. We got to do something about these guns. Hill Dog, she got in front of the first microphone she could see. I don't even think it was attached to anything. Oh, guns, anti-guns, we got to stop the guns. And so on and so forth. Where's the president? We gotta do something about these edged weapon attack. Only sporks! We can only sell sporks from now on. No more knives. Because knives are dangerous. And Dan Butcher is on the phone with me, the second best newsman in the business. Dan, how are we going to stop this insane knife violence?
Hey, you know what? It's time to ban knives. It's time to have knife-free zones. We need more knife regulations, Sean. We got to ban all of this. We need more gun control legislation. You know what? We just need to ban everything, Well, and that's the solution. Literally, if you listen to the liberals, that's the solution. Knife-free zones.
and Dan, it's funny because in the state of California, under 245 of the Penal Code, we already have rules against using a weapon against other people.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. Correct me if I'm wrong, but we have laws all over the country against using a weapon against anybody in this country for assault. But the problem is the bad guys don't give a damn about the laws. They don't give a damn about background checks. They don't care about gun-free zones. They don't care about anything. You can enact you could confiscate every single last weapon in the United States if you wanted to, but yet the bad guys would still find a way to get a knife, to get a gun, to get whatever they think that they need to carry out the attack. Prison is a great example. Prison is supposed to be, let's face it, prisons are supposed to be a weapon-free, drug-free zones, rape-free zones.
Yep.
Well, guess what? They're not. They still find a way to get the weapon, get the drugs, get the contraband, et cetera, et cetera. The bad guys are going to find a way to get these no matter what you do. And then in the meantime, let's penalize the law-abiding citizens that actually need the weapons to defend themselves. It's been proven time and time again that when you have an armed public that can defend themselves, crime goes down. It's proven time and time again when you enact such laws, such stringent gun control laws like you're seeing in Chicago, you're going to see increased instances of crime, increased murder, etc. The severity of the crimes also increase, Sean.
Well, and I know I rambled earlier on about prisons, but I have a friend of mine who's a prison guard, and he tells me some of the insane things that in California that they go through. They're handing out condoms in prison now to stop the spread of disease. Think about this for a second. Here's a place where everything is supposed to be controlled, and they're handing out condoms.
And here's the other thing, Sean, with this bizarro world that we've got going on where, we had the Department of Education yesterday announce that, if you've got a teenage daughter in a public school, they're going to have to shower in the same showers as the boys now. We're going to withhold our public funding to you. We're going to withhold federal funding to you. You know what? Here we're going to hand out condoms because in the bizarro world, we're going to have some have a woman out there that has become a man that's going to, quote unquote, become a man that's going to file a lawsuit somewhere and say, hey, you put me in a women's prison, but I should be in a men's prison because, well, I'm a man. Well, guess what? The attitude might change if that particular individual is raped, impregnated, et cetera, et cetera. But that is the bizarre world, upside down, twisted world that is trying to be forced upon us by progressives, under the leadership of Barack Obama. This is what you're seeing. It's the new, what they call the new normal. And Sean, I preached about this last night, that this stuff is just downright dangerous.
Yes.
It is dangerous for all of us. Dangerous for our children. Dangerous for you and I. It's dangerous. They're making our world more and more unsafe. And you've seen that. Let's go back and talk about, the Middle East for a minute. We have seen what has happened with the complete and utter collapse in the Middle East since President Obama withdrew the United States from that leadership in the world. We're supposed to be the leaders of freedom. We are the ones that are supposed to spread freedom around the world. Whether you like it or not, that is a role that the United States has embraced since the founding fathers. But yet you have Barack Obama pulling back, and who's filling the void? It is Vladimir Putin. It is the Iranians. It is China. All of the people that we did not want filling the void in these circumstances.
Well, so you go back to this stabbing incident, and I just kind of want to back the bus up a little bit. You go back to the stabbing incident. You go back to the shooting of Tyshawn Lee in Chicago. You go back to these incidents more and more, and it's funny how many people talk about fixing things, but nothing ever gets done. And I was talking to Liberal Jake, who's been on the show a bunch of times earlier today about this, and Liberal Jake said, he's like, if there was intelligent legislation out there for controlling violence, and I'd support it, but, and he quoted Ben Carson when Ben Carson said last week, and people on the left went nuts when he was asked, how do you stop, violence in the inner cities? And he's like, gun violence. He's like, teach people how to fight better. And he was quipping, but what he was essentially saying is, you're not going to be able to legislate your way out of violent behavior. You need to enforce the laws of the land. You need to let people know they will be held accountable for their actions. Heinous crimes need to be dealt with in a heinous way. You need to stop. We just released, 3,600, quote-unquote, nonviolent federal felons?
Over 6,000.
6,000. Well, excuse me, 6,000. Everything we're doing is going away from the direction that we should be going into. And yet the liberals keep talking about how we need to change and change and change, and we got to fix this and fix that. But they can't even come up with anything that is semi-intelligent. We were talking about, and again, Jake's not as liberal as we make him out to be on the show sometimes. He's more middle of the road, but, we were talking today about the Oregon shooting, and Jake said, I'm not necessarily for every teacher in a classroom carrying a gun because I think it brings things to a level that could get away from the education if the gun becomes the focus or whatever. But why are there not people in that school trained to deal with that sort of violence and that sort of assault that's taking place in a public place? Same thing with UC Merced. Yes, they have the University of California has its own police department, and they're very, very active. I know a couple of guys that work for the UC system. Good guys, but reality is what it is. Just like in Chicago, just like all over this country right now, when you're in a gun-free zone, the only hope you have during an attack, truly, is that the police department shows up quickly and or the gunman is overpowered or decides to take their life. That's really the only protection you have, because we've demonized guns in this country. We've done everything we can to make them seem like they are the problem. I always joke that I must have bought the two laziest guns on the face of the planet because they've never shot anybody yet. Even though they've had a lot of bullets go through them, they haven't shot anything. But the reality is, it's not the method of chaos, violence, and murder that is the problem. It is the chaos, the violence, and the murder that is the problem. When I look at Tyshawn Lee, a gun was used, but he could have easily have been stabbed by this monster, whoever it was, or strangulated. We have kids who are kidnapped and strangled way more than I'd like to admit. I think of the case out of Santa Cruz where the kid killed his neighbor. He was like 16, and he killed, I think she was a 7-year-old, a 6-year-old. He strangled her and stuffed her into a box. It is an unfortunate reality that we will never be able to completely stop, and you sure as hell can't legislate it into going away. Agador in the chat room, try enforcing the laws we have and keep in prison about punishment, as I said earlier in the show.
Exactly.
I couldn't agree more. But the situation, and I sat next to people who make laws for our prisons in California and rules at lunch. They didn't know I was listening. I was totally spying on these people. I'll be the first one to admit it. If you're sitting there and me talking about something important, I'm probably listening. But as I listen to them approach prison, all these liberals patting each other on the back about how they stopped ad seg or segregation, how they stopped this and that in the prisons, and this, and they're all about rehabilitation. And I had to get up and walk away. What we've done to this society, the dumbing down of this society, and the not holding people responsible for their actions, and it's not just criminal, right? You see this on so many levels, criminal, non-criminal. People don't want to be responsible for their actions. They expect government to come in and fix everything now. And this is where we have become.
Right. And let me come back, and I want to use something you were talking about earlier in the show. You mentioned that we have 16-year-olds that are openly saying, I am not afraid to go to prison. Okay? And I'm going to bring this into the conversation, too. Here we have the mothers of Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown still continuing to get their 5-minute, their 15 minutes of fame coming out and talking about they're supporting Hillary Clinton for president and stuff like that. You're talking about two mothers that could have cared, in my honest opinion, that are now profiteering off of the death of their son.
Yes.
It is great common knowledge about the infighting between in the Brown family over merchandising rights.
Yes.
Who's going to sell what and who's going to make money off of what in this case. Trayvon Martin's parents have become, a lot better off than what they were before since their son was killed. By the way, these were two young people that died as a result of their own actions.
Yes.
Not the actions. They forced the hand of Officer Darren Brown, and
right.
and et cetera. They forced the hands of these folks that took their lives.
Right.
But Johnny, it comes back to we've got a mentality in these neighborhoods now, and it's not just in the minority neighborhoods. This has spread into lower middle class and into the middle class neighborhoods in our country today,
and the upper class too. Though I mean, you see these kids that they'll get drunk at 17 years old, drive dad's Ferrari into a group of people, and get out and walk away like nothing happened. And and in the same situation, they're not held responsible. We had the outrage. I think it was in the Los Angeles area a couple years ago. That exact same situation, and the kid got a slap on the wrist and sent on his way, and people were outraged, and everyone said, "Oh well, it was only because he was a rich white kid." No, this is spectrum-wide, top to bottom.
Exactly. And, we've got, this is something that, a lot of people ask, well, how do we address this? How do we get to this? You know what? This is something that, number one, we have to enforce the laws that are on the books already. We've got plenty of laws. Those need to be enforced. But it goes further than that. This is something that we have to get back to literally the very roots. We've got to start over in a lot of these neighborhoods. And we've got to get in there, because what you're hearing and I'm going to pick on, and I'm going to talk about particularly the minority neighborhoods right now, because let's face it, Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson, they profiteer off of the backs of these folks.
Oh, nonstop.
Barack Obama plans on doing the same thing when he leaves office. if there, Al Sharpton has never seen Al Sharpton's never seen a black kid murdered. That the only time he's going to show up is if he can make a buck off of it. And then you have the Black Lives Matter movement, the New Black Panthers, the Nation of Islam. All of these are domestic terrorist groups. They should be addressed as such. They should be treated as such. They're calling for the open murder of police officers. So how do we deal with this? Because they're spreading this message. They're indoctrinating the youth in these minority neighborhoods into thinking this. There's an analogy that at one time that you can drive around in any neighborhood, and you can drive around to grammar schools, and you know what? You see little kids, regardless of their color, whether they're black, white, Hispanic, Laotian, whatever. All of these kids are playing together.
Yep.
They're playing together. They don't know of the hate. But at some point in their lives, by the time they get to be that 16-year-old kid that's saying, you know what? I'm not afraid to kill somebody. I'm not afraid to kill a police officer. I'm not afraid to go to prison. All white people are evil, whatever. Something has been ingrained in them to form that hate. And it's the absolute nonsense that you see coming out of the mouth of Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson, Barack Obama, and the Obama administration openly advocate this nonsense.
Yes.
Talking about the evils of the police officers. Talk about white privilege, wealth redistribution, all of that nonsense. When in reality, if you listen to the true leaders in the African American community, and we're going to talk about, and we'll use Dr. Ben Carson as an example, Alan West, and the list goes on and on and on. But if you listen to these folks, they say, you know what we got to do? We got to get back to the very root of the problem. We've got to get to the rot that's in the root that has taken hold in these neighborhoods. We've got to return our fathers back into the families. We've got to return God back into our families. We've got to return, God back into our classrooms. People got to get involved in their communities, involved in their children's education. And, we got to talk to people about pursuing the American dream, pursuing whatever opportunities that they need, educational-wise, college, trade, whatever, to help them become successful, to talk to them about being an entrepreneur, talk to them about inventing the next great widget. Those were the type of messages that you heard from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Yes.
in these cases. That is not what you hear today. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is rolling over in his grave at the nonsense that's taking place. But, Sean, to solve these problems, we've got to go back into these neighborhoods and instill the family values. Families need to sit down and eat dinner together with their kids. Saying hello to a neighbor, opening a door for somebody, saying thank you to a police officer. People have to understand most of the police officers that work in these neighborhoods, they live in these neighborhoods. They raise their kids in their neighborhoods. They have a vested interest in making sure that crime does not happen, that crime goes down. They want to be able to go home at night so that they can, be with their kids to teach them right from wrong. But yet, you have way too many people that are putting that negative vibe out there, so to speak. Giving these kids, these young people, a negative message. You know what? You've got to hate the police. Because if you don't hate the police, you got to kill the police before they kill you. That's the message that they're getting, Sean.
Well, Dan, and you look at kind of the root, and you touched on it a little bit. Personal responsibility
exactly
is the biggest one. Because you know what? When these kids are taught, you don't want to get a job. Jobs are for fools. You can sling dope and make more money than you'll ever make working your 9-to-5 job. But part of doing that is those cops are coming down the street. They're going to try to catch you and stop you. So you got to get them before they get you. And also, that guy over there may be a snitch. So the next time you see him, throw a beating on him, blah, 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 this, so on and so forth. There are many kids that are introduced to life as that being the correct way to be productive, and that is the problem. And it goes down to parenting, like you said. It goes down to parenting and families. And
right.
And I don't even care, we can talk about religion all you want, one way or the other, but instilling morals and values into kids be it through a religious way or a just this is right from wrong.
Exactly.
It can still achieve the same. We can argue that, perhaps if it's part of a religious belief that you'll ingrain it deeper. Okay, that's an argument for another day. But like I said when I was talking about Chicago and the outrage, these communities have created these problems, and they're not addressing it. And the police can't fix it without the community helping. And it'll always be that way no matter what. We're up against a break. Are you going to stick around for the other side of the break?
Sure.
And, you happen to be the second best newsman in the business. I will give you the topic after the break. How do you like that?
Now you're putting me on the spot. I'm prepared. But we'll come up with something when we come back.
All that and more here on the Sackheads Radio Show live on the SHR Media Network. Dan Butcher from Pundit Press will join us on the other side of the break.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Hey, it's Jersey Joe from Reefer of Common Sense, and we have moved to a new night and time. Every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on SHRmedia.com, you will catch the Reefer of Common Sense uncensored, unfiltered, and only on SHRmedia.com.
In a world controlled by corrupt politicians,
You got a business. You didn't build that.
a team of ordinary men emerge from the ashes to give voice to the voiceless and hope to the hopeless. Sackhead Sean.
Dude, I'm not saying coffee is stupid, bro.
Sackhead Clint.
All good friends of ours usually show up drunk.
Also starring Sacco as the producer.
I'm a little bit drunk, 'cause I'm drinking.
They are the Sackheads Radio Show. Every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Pacific on SHRmedia.com.
This is Tammy Jackson, inviting you to join me on the Tammy Jackson Show every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Pacific on the 405radio.com. Put down that remote and tune into the show that covers politics, guns and the Second Amendment, religious liberties, sanctity of life, the military, and more. I host newsworthy guests and work hard to be a conservative radio show that's not like all the others. So save Tuesday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific for me, Tammy Jackson, on the 405media.com.
Who listens to the Andrea Kaye Show? Let's find out as we eavesdrop on listener Roger Johnson in Encinitas.
If our policy is going to be bring any child who comes across the border and says coordination, we have to take them in.
Okay, so apparently Roger fell asleep in the middle of my brilliant political tirade, and now he plans to sue me because I put him on the air, sleeping. Obviously, he's a liberal.
Snoring, not an option while listening to The Andrea Kaye Show, Tuesday mornings at 11 on Financial News and Talk.
You know I'm right. Y'all know I'm right.
Hello, I'm Matt, a student at Hillsdale College. Here is Hillsdale President Larry Arnn on the continuing relevance of the Constitution.
Many argue today that the Constitution is outdated because it addresses problems peculiar to the 18th century. Some parts of the Constitution do read rather quaintly. Consider the injunction against titles of nobility in Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution. But is that so outdated? The purpose of the injunction is to prevent the government granting special privileges to some for partisan reasons. This strikes at the heart of the rule of law. The crony capitalism so common today is a place where the government bestows favors and tax dollars on some businesses to give them a leg up over others. This is exactly the kind of thing the Constitution was meant to prohibit. The Constitution is not so outdated after all.
This Constitution Minute was brought to you by Hillsdale College. To join the national conversation on the Constitution, go to constitutionminute.com.
And we're back here on the Sackheads Radio Show, live on the SHR Media Network. With me as always, not as always, but more and more lately it seems, El Duce, bowl number 2. Dan Butcher, the editor-in-chief of Pundit Press, second best newsman in the business, filling in for the absent Sackhead Clint, who is apparently, and I'm just going to throw this out there, maybe the hookers are throwing rocks back at him. I don't know. I can't confirm or deny, but I'm just saying it's looking like it's going that way.
They were remembering.
They were like, "Hey, that was the giant nose that threw rocks at us last time."
We remember him. They never forget.
And all he was doing was bitching about politics the whole time. He's a weird guy. Weird guy, Ace. Weird guy. So.
Well, you know, Sean, I got a couple of stories I want to get your thoughts on, and one of them is going to be the governor's race that just happened in Kentucky and how significant that race is. But this one has just been eating at me for the last 2 days, and I've actually given a few radio interviews on this story. And I alluded to it in one of my rants earlier, and that had to do with the Department of Education telling a high school that boys and girls must use the same showers. But there's a very interesting twist in this story that a lot of people are overlooking, that the Obama administration's Department of Education is using in this case. Now, an Illinois high school has been ordered by the Department of Education to allow a male transgender student to use the girls' locker room and showers. If the Township High School District 211 in Palatine, Illinois, refuses to accommodate the male transgender student, the Department of Education has threatened to cut off federal funding to the district. Now, here is the twist in this, okay? The Department of Education Civil Rights Division is claiming that the district violated Title IX with the Title IX ruling from 1972 with, quote, a preponderance of evidence by not allowing the male transgender student to use showers in the female locker room. Quote, unfortunately, Township High School District 211 is not following the law because the district continues to deny a quote-unquote female student, who's actually a male transgender student, the right to use the girls' locker room. And this was from Catherine Lehman, the Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights in the Department of Education, who was appointed by Barack Obama, by the way. Now, here's the key to this. We now have President Obama's Department of Education applying a 1972 federal law that prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex. Most of this had to do with sports in high school and on the collegiate level.
Yeah, that was not the spirit of this law when it was passed. That was not the spirit of this law.
So now what the Obama administration is doing, they are applying this to transgender cases. And I'm going to sum this up real quick. The Department of Education went on to say that student A has not only received an unequal opportunity to benefit from the district's educational program, but also has experienced an ongoing sense of isolation throughout her quote-unquote high school enrollment at the school. Now, I want to quote what the superintendent had to say, because the school district had been allowing the male transgender student to use a completely separate locker room and shower facility. This was so that the girls using the primary girls' locker room and shower would not feel uncomfortable or unsafe with a male student running around with his parts everywhere in their presence. The school superintendent, Daniel Cates, said that the goal was to balance rights, accommodate the male transgender student, and protect the privacy rights of all students when changing clothes or showering before or after physical education and after-school activities. And I think he had a money quote here. He said, "We are very hopeful that we're going to be able to work out and find a solution before this gets to the matter of funding. If we were to implement OCR's unilateral mandate of unconditional access, we believe it sacrifices both student privacy and overrides the will of our local Board of Education." Now, here's the money quote. "The students in our schools are teenagers, not adults. One's gender is not the same as one's anatomy. Boys and girls are in separate locker rooms where there are open changing areas and open shower facilities for a reason." Sean, Your turn, buddy.
Well, listen, as I said, that was not the intent of this law. Agador pointed out the spirit of this law was to protect essentially one side playing for the other.
Exactly.
And make sure that nobody got hurt for size difference. It's one of those things that we saw this in California when they passed the bathroom laws out here, right? Anyone high school down, if you identify as one, you can use whatever you want. It doesn't matter if you're a boy, girl, whatever. And this is spreading even more. We talk about this. It's what they want, right? This whole equality thing. Oh, it's equality. If that person wants to identify as that gender, then they should be able to use the bathroom of that gender. Okay. But your rights only go as far until they infringe upon somebody else's. And you talk about the transgender male who was born a male and has male parts that walks into the female locker room and shower. What about the protection? And I believe the government has to offer equal protection. What about the protection of those females who feel uncomfortable, embarrassed, scared, everything that teenage girls feel when they walk around dressed anyhow, now undressed with a classmate who has a penis?
Right. And Sean, let me point this out to you real quick. Here in Texas, yesterday during the elections, Houston's anti-discrimination law was voted down by the citizens of Houston, and the reason being in that is because part of that ordinance that was enacted by the city council and was really pressed by the openly gay mayor of Houston was that all businesses, all schools would have to provide restrooms, gender neutral restrooms, and the big concern there was about the safety of people.
Yes.
Now, coming back to this particular thing with schools, you've basically had the Obama administration is now telling schools. This actually goes further from this school in Illinois. This has ramifications all across the country. That the Obama administration is now saying, guess what? You have to now allow your teenage boys and girls in your public schools to share showers, to share the same bathrooms, or we're going to withhold your federal funding. Now, here's where this gets dangerous. When you have children in public school, and you drop your children off at school every day,
yep,
you have a reasonable expectation of a certain amount of expectation for the safety of your children. You're turning the safety of your children over to people that you expect to take care of them. And my argument has been that when you start opening stuff up like this, okay, and my own daughter was talking with me last night about this on the air, and she shared the story about a rape that took place behind a high school building that she knew about. And so the thing is, what is to stop, let's say you've got a pedophile or a serial rapist, what all of a sudden is to stop them from making this a new MO? Hey, you know what? Yep. I'm transgender. This gives me the opportunity and open access to a whole new set of victims that I might not have had access before. They're just handing this to me. And so basically what is happening with this is that we are endangering our children with this type of nonsense, Sean. It's endangering women. You want to talk about a war on women, war on children? Here it is, folks. This is the type of nonsense that we need to really be talking about and pressing and exposing just how dangerous these type of progressive ideas are. Progressives throw this stuff out there. Everything with progressives is a theory. They're not tried and true. So what happens is they bring all of these theories into the real world. Hey, you know what? Everybody can use the same bathroom. Boys and girls can, with raging hormones in high school, can share the showers. Nothing will happen. Nobody will get raped. Nothing will happen. This is a bunch of nonsense. But when you put this stuff into the real world, whether it's economics, this type of stuff, dealing with racism, what have you, it all fails. And in this case, it's very, very, I can't stress this enough, very dangerous.
Well, and, Ag in the chat room, who's just always brilliant, but he says, I'm waiting for a state somewhere to say, okay, fine, keep your state, your federal education money. I hope so. I truly do. But, the reality is before we even work our way up to the idea of the pedophile using this as a way in, and I brought this, I did bring this up when they talked about the bathrooms here in California a couple years ago.
Right.
Just think about the typical normal 14, 15, 16-year-old boys who turn around and say, hey, you know what? This is my chance to go into the girls' shower. Yeah, I identify, and as innocent, as innocent as I could possibly be, but it's raging hormones, but as non-predatory, I guess is the better way of putting it, as that would be, the reality is it's only a matter of time before that next step is taken, right? Before the kid gets in there and does or says something stupid, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And, when they brought up the bathrooms and these showers and all this other stuff, I say it all the time. I don't care if you're a guy and want to dress as a woman. I don't care if you're a woman and want to dress as a guy. If you want to go full Bruce Jenner and you have the money to do it, I don't really care per se. It's so far down on my list of things that I worry about. But when I say that your rights only go as far, this is what I'm talking about. And you already had, this is when they should look at the retail industry. Retail industry 10 years ago started putting in family bathrooms into stores, which I use all the time, right? You go in there with your kid, et cetera, et cetera. You can't use the bathroom having your kid running amok or not being able to keep an eye on them. You have this family bathroom where it's, one use at a time, if you will. And I said, why in California, if we're going to spend all this money to pass this law, why can we not just put in a neutral bathroom? Hey, you know what? Whatever you identify as, even if you don't identify as anything, it's a neutral bathroom. Single-stalled, lock on the door,
right?
No risk. Same thing with these showers. If we have to go full campground on this and have showers with timers and locks and all this other stuff that you walk into and you change right outside the shower and nobody has access to you, okay. I think there are better things that we need to spend our money on, but at least you're protecting everybody equally at that point. And everybody is being treated the same, right? Everyone has access to use the private showers or the boys' room or the girls' room or whatever. But to turn around and say that now these young kids have to accept and or identify, and this is the other thing too, when I talk about gay, lesbian, transgender, one of the things that I ask of them is the same thing I ask of heterosexual couples. Don't force me to have a conversation with my child that I'm not ready to have. And when you have stuff like this, you are now impeding on my personal life to have a conversation with my child when my child says, hey, Daddy, how come that little girl is peeing in the bathroom with me? Or vice versa. That's up to families to have that conversation when they feel their children are ready. And you are now having the federal government, again, come into your home via their action and forcing conversations. And I don't think, again, that this is anything to do with the federal damn government, and all they're doing is trying to stick their nose in, and you nailed it too.
There you go.
You nailed it right on the head. War on women. Where are the feminists with this right now, saying, wait a second. It's bad enough you objectify women on, in Victoria's Secret or whatever, but now you're going to allow boys to come in and shower with them and objectify and force them to have to do it?
I'll tell you where the feminists are on this. We're naming Caitlyn Jenner Woman of the Year. That's where the feminists are on this. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, well...
yeah.
Well, and it's so funny.
I know that's a whole other subject, but it is really the truth.
No, it is the truth. That's the thing is, the feminist movement, it's almost like they don't know who to support in this. So all of a sudden they're Switzerland, right? As long as you don't impede on our land, we don't want any part of it. If you bomb us, we'll hold your pilots, but that's about it. Seriously, it's absolutely frightening. And listen, I'm not a big fan of the feminist movement because I think it pushes women into... it essentially tells women no matter what your status is in life and whether or not you're happy, you're wasting your life, whether they are or not. And it's just another way for a group of people to make money off the blight or even faux outrage of others.
Exactly.
But
exactly,
going back to the reality, this is, once again, the government imposing their will over state and local authorities. And they're doing it. This is extortion on the top. This isn't... listen, this law, and somebody's going to challenge it, and it'll eventually go to court. You could prove what this law was written for back in 1974, I believe it was. The federal government is using an old, antiquated law that was intended for something different to turn around and extort a local government to achieve an outcome that the feds desire.
Yeah.
Thinking about that for a second.
Yeah. Yeah, the original context of Title IX was to ensure equal, and it was purely had to do with women's sports. This is what Title IX was originally built on, and then it spread to other things. But it was to make sure, the original intent of Title IX was to make sure that women athletes in universities, high schools, etc., had the same funding and the same access to facilities as the men did. That was the original intent of Title IX. But over the years, it has been expanded upon, to now where we have, let's face it, it's every progressive / liberal / Democrat's dream to have centralized control over everything. And of course, the holy grail, the two holy grails of all of that are number one, healthcare, number two, education. And so they use this under the guise of Title IX. Now, that just because this individual kid is identifying as a male, well, now Title IX applies to him / her, whatever you want to use here. And so that is where you were exactly right. They're holding people hostage with the funding. Now, I want to come to this real quick because I know we're short on time. But this, number one, the big story that gives you some sense of hope in all this. This number one is what happened in Houston with that discrimination law being shot down by the voters in Houston. The other had to do with the fact that Republican Matt Bevin was elected governor of Kentucky. And if you weren't following Matt Bevin's campaign, he was if you want to, here in the year, if you want to say, of the outsider candidates, such as Donald Trump and Dr. Ben Carson, Matt Bevin fits that bill. He told the Republican Party to take a hike. I don't want nothing to do with you in this election, even though he was running as a Republican. And so here he is. He had all the latest polls up until Election Day showed him getting trounced by Democratic Attorney General Jack Conway. But in the end, Bevin turned around and beat Conway 52.52% to 43.8% in this election. It was a landslide. So here was a guy that did everything he could to keep the Republican establishment from helping him in this campaign. He ends up winning and becoming governor. Now, of course, the Democrats were very quick to point out that, you know what, the reason he won is because, well, you know what, the voters wanted an outside candidate. So the Democrats are kind of smart in catching on here, as are the Republicans. The Republican voters are catching on to this. And you want to talk about somebody that the liberals, they're going to really be hard pressed to find things to hate about Bevin, because he is a Tea Party favorite. But if you look at this was a picture of his family that he had today. And he's adopted several kids, foster kids, whatever. But if you look at the makeup of his family, you want to talk about a melting pot of a family. He had children, Hispanic, African American, Caucasian, you name it. He had it in his family.
Right.
So they're going to be really hard pressed to find something to not like against this guy. And the fact that a candidate like Matt Bevin was able to win, and to be honest, Bevin actually shot himself in the foot a few times in this campaign. That's why he was trailing so far in a lot of the polls, but I think the polls were really miscalculated.
Well, and we know about how polls have been just,
exactly.
You can't trust polls lately.
Exactly. I paid no attention to them a lot of times, although we have to quote them to kind of gauge. But in this case, this is something to give, especially those of us on the conservative side of things, to give us hope, and it kind of gives us a good feel for what the voters' mood is heading into this 2016 presidential election. And not only do the Democrats have to pay attention to this, but be damned, the Republicans better pay close attention to this as well, because I think you're going to start seeing, the Tea Party was never meant to be a party. It was supposed to be a movement,
right.
And it has expanded into the conservative movement and a lot of those values and it continues to this day, and it's far from being dead. And you're going to start see. I think you're going to see. We're starting to really get a gauge on the voters' attitude and mood here, and they are tired, sick and tired of all the BS, Sean.
Well, and when you look at typical politicians, and again, talking to Liberal Jake today, and I got to give him credit where it's due, he said, if you tried to be a Donald Trump 4 years ago, maybe, but 8 years ago, it wouldn't have gone as far. People wouldn't have been enamored with the non-politician who says what he wants and doesn't care about PAC money or whatever because he doesn't need it. People would have been like, almost like they were the first time Donald Trump ran for president. But now people are so disgusted with the ideas of politicians in general that a character like Donald Trump can just bloom in front of everybody and go a long way. And I know he's starting to slip in the polls, and that's only because, the froth is starting to wear off and we're getting down to the actual coffee underneath. You're starting to see people who are actually going to go somewhere rise, i.e. right now Dr. Ben Carson, and others as well. And I'm not playing down Ted Cruz or anyone else who has a legitimate chance. I'm just pointing out that Carson's leading the polls right now. But the same thing happened in Kentucky, right? They went for the non-politician. They went for the guy who kind of didn't care, like you said. He told the Republicans to screw, I'll do it myself. He got a running mate who is absolutely brilliant, an Air Force veteran originally born in Detroit. I think blew everyone away that she was black. I think that, I'm sure there's still people on the Democrats going, oh, I can't believe he did that. But, she's very intelligent. If you read everything about her, she's a small business owner. That's how she started out after the military. It looks like there's no flies on her either. So you have these two people who the public could identify with and politicians could not. And that's how they got elected. And they may not be perfect, and I don't care. I don't expect them to be perfect, but I expect with somebody like that you will have more realistic legislation go on in a state because they are real people who are running a government, which is how our government is supposed to be run.
Exactly. And, Sean, I'll make this prediction right now. Kind of starting to fill out how some of the Republican candidates are starting to drop off a little bit. Donald Trump's not going anywhere, folks.
Right.
He's going to stay at the top. I think Dr. Carson's going to stick around for a little longer, but I think he'll start to falter a little bit. The one name that is really starting to peak, and I actually watched his campaign here in the state of Texas, running a campaign very similar to what we saw in Kentucky in the governor's race there. True grassroots campaign, snubbing his nose at the Republican establishment, and that is Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz at this point is running a very smart campaign. He's starting to peak. He's starting to gain that momentum, and in the end, I think when we get to the, it would not surprise me at all if we go into Cleveland next year in July to the national convention that we have to have a brokered convention, that we're actually going to have to choose between two of the candidates, between Ted Cruz and Donald Trump when we get there. So I think it's going to be those type of candidates that are going to come to the forefront, because that is what the people want.
Yep.
And that is certainly not what the GOP establishment is wanting to hear. But they're not going to have a choice, and that's exactly what
they don't have a choice. They didn't.
Exactly.
They're not going to. And those on the left who identify, with Hillary Clinton identifying with the normal people. Just a reminder of my own backyard, say in Sacramento, there was a private fundraiser for $2,700 a plate. So if you wanted to be a normal person and get close to Hillary Clinton, as long as you come up with $2,700 for a cheap lunch, that tells you everything that's going on that side. Hey, we're up against a break. Dan's back tomorrow at 5 p.m. on the West Coast, 8 p.m. on the East Coast for news and commentary with Dan Butcher right here on the SHR Media Network. Make sure you check out everyone on SHR Media. Great people, great insight. Agador, Red Fox with Cal Fritzy, our bestest Canadian friend to the North A, Jersey Joe, everybody. Check them out, and you won't be disappointed. You might be disappointed in me, but you won't be disappointed in them. The second best newsman of the business, editor-in-chief of Pundit Press, Dan Butcher, sir, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to be on with the second best Sackhead as well. Thanks a lot, Sean.
That's it for the Sackheads Radio Show. We'll be back next Wednesday at 8 o'clock Pacific, 11 on the East Coast. Make sure you check out the podcast if you missed any part of the show. Download it on Spreaker. Just search SHR Media. Slide on down to Sackheads. Click play, and you can do that with any one of our great shows. We'll talk to you next week.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media
in America, Sackheads Radio. And listen, there are no people better on the air to give you the best in conservative talk than Sackhead Sean and Sackhead Clint. And we're working on the immigration papers for a certain other guy who happens to work here too. But for those who are tuning in around the world to the best in late night conservative talk, Sackheads Radio. The best late night conservative talk show in America. In America.
And in this web was a large, I'm